If I could ask those of you at the back to have a seat and join us, then we'll feel full and ready for Arlene's presentation. My name's Adele Dubkowski. I'm the Executive Director of Arts Build Ontario. And I just want to welcome each and every one of you to Staging Sustainability over the next 2 days. And I also want to particularly welcome those of you who have come from far-flung places to be here with us. Some of them as far-flung as Ottawa, and others as far-flung as Scotland and Berlin. So for all of the travelers, thank you very much for making the effort. I'm not going to spend too much time because we're a little bit pressed for getting forward today. It's a full agenda, and you'll have people guide you through it. But what I want to start you off with is just the thought that we're really excited that you're joining us here in Toronto as we begin a journey that our organizing committee started a few months ago, not realizing just how many factors there are to consider in this extraordinary topic. So we hope that this is a day of today, and tomorrow is another day of great learning for you and great exchange. We welcome you again. I'd like to thank everybody whose names appear in all of the places you'll see them, and I'm going to pass you over to Ian.
So, I didn't introduce myself before. I just asked you to do something, and you complied, and I appreciate that. But I'm Ian Garrett. Amongst other things, I'm Assistant Professor of Ecological Design for Performance at York University and Director of the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts. And I'm relatively new to Toronto. This is my second year being here. And in working with Arts Build, it's been a real treat to create this agenda around sustainability, and it's all in all of its dimensions. So it's not just about one area or another. And I hope that as much as you come away with interesting ideas of what to do with your organizations or your theater companies or just your own practice, that you also come away, and it's sort of programmed this way, with questions and are provoked into problematizing what you do. As more of a housekeeping measure, I do want to thank our sponsors, the Professional Alliance of Canadian Theatres, TD Bank, Toronto Hydro, the Canada Council for the Arts, DTAH Architects, the Metcalf Foundation, MDMA Architects, Pynchon Environmental, and the City of Toronto. Also, it's important to know that Staging Sustainability and all of the conference sessions taking place here at 99 are powered by Bullfrog Power, so it's 100% green electricity. All of that goes into the grid to mount the amount of electricity that these events use. If you'd like more information, Bullfrog Power can be found at bullfrogpower.com. I want to quickly get us to Arlene. I'm excited to have Arlene. I sort of had the treat of, when putting together this program, of sort of inviting everybody that I wanted to hear from, and hopefully I will find the time to do that as well. But Arlene Goldbard is a writer, speaker, consultant, and cultural activist whose focus is at the intersection of culture, politics, and spirituality. Her blog and other writings can be found on her website at arlenegoldbard.com. She's from New York, but now resides in San Francisco, and she's got 2 new books, both of which will be available here, The Wave and The Culture of Possibility, Art, Artists, and the Future, both published in spring of this last year. She has a number of books to her name and a lot of great things to say, so that we can get the day rolling, I'll bring up Arlene Goldbard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone. I'm very grateful to have been invited here. I'm going to use my time in 3 different ways. I'm going to talk to you for a little more than half an hour, and then, time permitting, I'm going to ask you some questions to engage with for a few moments, and then we should have the balance of our time for questions and discussion. And I want to see what time it is right now. Okay. If somebody, I know we still want to try to end around 10, and so we might not have too much time for discussion, but if somebody will signal me a few moments before 10, that would be great. And Ian mentioned books. There's some on the counter over there. There's a special conference pricing and an envelope for the honor system. I'm going to start with a joke. A man goes shopping for a new suit. The salesman says he has a perfect one, so the man tries it on. The arms are too long, the man complains. The salesman says, no problem, just bend your arms like this a little. Look, they're perfect now. The man complains that now the collar is up around his neckline. The salesman says, no problem, just hunch your back a little and the collar will be perfect. The man looks in the mirror again and says, now the pants are under my heels. The salesman says, just bend your knees a little bit this way and the legs will be perfect. Look in the mirror. The man says, I look like a pretzel. The salesman says, but what a gorgeous suit. So most jokes are parables, and I'm guessing that you know how to interpret this one. We're all the man in the story. The suit is the ill-fitting reality map that the operators of our absurd system expect us to adjust to. And the salesman represents all who profit from our acquiescence. I don't have to tell you, especially those of you who were obliging enough to giggle at the end, that framing the lesson in the form of a story brings home its point with much more economy and directness than, say, a well-researched and well-footnoted white paper on power relations in our time. When Ian invited me to speak here today, he asked me to define sustainability, and insanely, I said yes. I'm going to do that in a little bit, but before I turn to that challenge, I want to tell you a little bit more than my joke said about the context for my talk this morning. I'd like to begin by stipulating a few things. First, the end of the world has been predicted many times in human history. So far, these predictions have all been premature. So far, the challenge has always been, how will we go on living? Today, a great many smart people think we may finally have figured out how to make the doomsday prediction come true. But just as with prior generations, we can't know. We are not privileged to know the future until it unfolds, until it becomes first present and then past. We can't be sure what actions may trigger a tipping point, tumbling old certainties into new shapes. Indeed, even in the short term, even when it comes to relatively small things, we can't guarantee the results of our actions because the law of unintended consequences is the only one never broken. I'm here to argue today that the individuals in this room may be what catalyzes the great turning that saves the world this time. It may be that you agree with me already, but if you don't, I ask you to consider how your own feelings and actions might be different if you actually believe that to be true. Second, we live in a time marked by a careless disregard for the power of randomness and a remarkably credulous faith in our own creations. Every hour, everywhere, experts are running the numbers, extrapolating the future from the past. They believe reality's mysteries can be unlocked by computer modeling. Sometimes they turn out to be right, but not nearly as often as they want the rest of us to think. Many times, their predictions fit reality about as well as the man in my old joke, the suit in my old joke. We've seen a string of storms of unprecedented magnitude, rendering forecasts and preparedness based on past events absolutely irrelevant. We've seen venerable financial firms crumble after betting their futures on exotic derivatives and subprime mortgages. In many of our lifetimes, significant human events, the fall of apartheid, the Velvet Revolution, the legalization of same-sex unions, having progressed for decades at a snail's pace, suddenly ripened, rippling across the face of the globe, surprising experts and everyone else. Indeed, as Philip Tetlock proved in his long-term study of expert political judgment, no one has much ability to predict the future. but correct predictions emerge in inverse proportion to expert credentials. Over the 2 decades of his study, graduate students' track record was much better than senior professors, and worst of all were those holding high honors such as endowed chairs. This is not because graduate students are smarter or know more, but because they know less. Credentialed experts are even more prey than the rest of us to what the cognitive scientists call confirmation bias. The world is bursting with data enough to confirm any hypothesis. When we're sure of something, we tend to sift the data for confirmation rather than facing it with wide open minds. Confidence in our certainties makes us dumb. We think we know the answers, but really what we need is to learn to live into the questions. Third, sometimes I use a computer analogy to describe our dilemma and opportunity. Everywhere, we are surrounded by competing answers to the wicked problems and social messes of our time. It's easy to feel as if we need to become experts ourselves, consuming vast amounts of technical information to discover the correct answers and align our thoughts and actions with them. It's even easier to contemplate doing that and feel overwhelmed by the mere anticipation of information overload and subside into a passivity that defaults the decisions to others, or worse, into a despair that leads to giving up without really trying. The multitudes of competing answers can be compared to computer software. We have a nearly infinite number of programs and applications to choose from, and no sooner have we made a choice than something new comes along to trigger reconsideration. Is there ever one right answer? There are many practical approaches: legislation, intervention, organizing, to climate change, pollution, and other environmental challenges, just as there are to questions of social justice. It's very likely that more than one path will lead to progress if only we step out of our paralysis and pursue it. It's a mistake to believe that finding the right answer, the right software, is the necessary catalyst for change. Instead, what life on Earth is asking of us right now is to change the operating system, the mental framework that makes the man in my joke accept ugliness, pain, and powerlessness just because an expert tells him to. The key problem we are facing isn't persuading people that the future would be better without climate change. No one wants to die in a tidal wave or a drought. No one wants to live cold and lonely in the dead husks of a civilization that failed to outlast its appetites. But no matter how scared they are by doomsday images, many people are not now able to see an alternative future in which their own choices and actions have value and agency, in which their own fates are closely linked to the fate of the planet, in which the vast numbers who do not personally benefit from poisoning our air, earth, and water recognize themselves as subjects in history rather than its objects, and reject the domination of those commanding them to adjust to absurdity, despair, irrelevance. So how do we respond to what's being demanded? How do we change the operating system? In a while, I'm going to offer some possible suggestions that say why we are the right people to be asking this question and why our gifts as artists may be just what the world needs. But first, I want to go back to Ian's question. What is sustainability? As I set out to write this talk, I asked quite a few people to define sustainability, and as you can imagine, they gave me all sorts of answers. For some, it's the carrying capacity of the planet, maintaining its ability to continue supporting diverse life forms, including humans. Others spoke of multiple aspects of sustainability: environmental, political, economic, and cultural. They preferred a definition that encompassed 4 healthy, interlocking, and interdependent systems, supporting not only survival, but a continuous positive process of adaptation and development. The implicit meaning of the term refers to its opposite. We fear having damaged ecosystems so much that life on Earth will soon be unsustainable, so sustainability names our search for whatever can heal that damage and whatever can allow us to carry on. But the term sustainability bothers me a little bit. For one thing, it sets the bar kind of low. A few months ago, I spoke at the Zero Waste Conference in Vancouver. Michael Braungart, co-author of The Upcycle and Cradle to Cradle, offered a powerful and entertaining keynote. He pointed out that if someone asked how your marriage was going and you said it's sustainable, that wouldn't be a ringing endorsement. He contrasted the sometimes character of environmental movement discourse, which can focus on reduction of impact to the point where even the greenest among us may feel guilty for taking up space on the planet, to the aim of making our impact positive. For instance, he noted that a zero emissions tree couldn't exist. Dead or alive, trees emit, but what they emit improves the environment for all life on Earth. I also doubt that sustainability is an absolute good. Shouldn't we differentiate between what may be worth sustaining and what may not? You and I may agree that chemical-intensive agriculture or carbon-based fuels are not sustainable. It's very likely that life as we know it has a finite capacity to absorb the damage that they do. But what about our institutions? Should we commit to sustaining our ways of regulating markets, responding to those in need, educating children? Or are some systems so broken that even though they could be sustained through a long stretch of human history, it falls to us to replace them? I'm going to seize Humpty Dumpty's prerogative. Humpty told Alice, when I use a word, it means just what I want it to mean. When I use the word sustainable then, I'm going to make it mean thriving. Sustainability in my vocabulary is the capacity to thrive over time, the conditions, inputs, and freedom to make that possible. And when I talk about sustainability, I'm speaking not just of the environment, but of 4 concentric circles of thriving: personal, organizational, communal, and planetary. As individuals, of course, we need air, food, water, shelter, exercise, and so on to sustain life. To thrive, to face challenges and realize our fullest potential, we need care and connection, beauty and meaning, pleasure and purpose. To fully experience these things, we need to know ourselves, cultivating awareness of our own feelings, thoughts, and actions, putting choice in the place of compulsion. We need deep curiosity about the world and its other inhabitants, and the capacity for imaginative empathy that enables us to behave with compassion toward others. To act on these things, we need to eject the voice of internalized powerlessness, the voice that speaks inside our own heads on behalf of those who benefit from the current order of things and want as many of us as possible to remain passive and pliant. When we join together in groups or organizations to pursue common aims, sustainability depends on each of us maintaining a dual awareness. We must be present to our own needs, feelings, and limitations, as well as to the needs and potentials of the group as a whole, calibrating our decisions and actions such that group interests are not damaged by personal interests, such that we maintain our rootedness in what matters most to us as individuals, neither sacrificing integrity nor essence. To thrive, we must understand that until we are present to other people's stories, receiving them with dignity and respect, we cannot expect others to be present to our stories. And without that reciprocity of listening and expression, even if an organization endures, it will not thrive. Our communities, whether geographic or based on some other affinity, thrive when there is a deep shared sense of cultural citizenship. In a condition of full cultural citizenship, Everyone feels at home in his or her own community. Everyone's contributions are valued. We want to know and learn from each other, and our recognition of a common fate leads to an inclusive, democratic dialogue exploring shared values and valued differences and decisions that nurture a sustainable commons. If a critical mass of us were functioning within these three types of sustainability, individual, organizational, and communal, planetary sustainability would be a daily practice, rather than what it seems now to many people, an unattainable dream. Because our lives would be woven into a fabric of mutual accountability and care, we would be unwilling, in effect unable, to treat each other as objects and to see the world merely as a collection of things to exploit and manipulate. We would replace the broken stewards of our economy and radically curtail corporate power. Our commonwealth would be invested in green energy, in upcycling instead of wasteful and toxic manufacturing, in ensuring that every child receives the love and care that maximizes potential and cultivates full cultural citizenship. Planetary sustainability would be grounded in the golden rule, the DNA of every spiritual system, which prohibits our doing to others what we would hate to have done to ourselves. Planetary sustainability would be the thriving of life on Earth. To achieve all four forms of sustainability, as I said earlier, we need to address not just the software of society, but its operating system, our basic skills of awareness, perception, and interpretation, and how we act on them. I'm using the word we literally in that sentence. Everyone who makes art or who supports the creation and presentation of art is a consciousness worker. When we also want to heal the world, then whether we make theater or dance or compose music or make films or write, our medium is consciousness and our work is its transformation. What then is it that qualifies artists, consciousness workers, to focus on our collective operating system? First, our own transformative experiences qualify us. In our own histories, we've glimpsed the type of transformation we have the capacity to catalyze for others. Behind every choice to live as a maker of beauty and meaning, or one who supports that process, there's an awakening. It can best be characterized in spiritual terms, as an encounter with the ineffable, with something that can never be fully expressed, but which ignites in our hearts the desire to keep trying. The specifics of these encounters differ greatly. Maybe you were taken for the first time to a theater, a film, or a concert, and your experience in that darkened space transported you to a time and place very different from ordinary life. Maybe your entire being was concentrated on receiving that experience, body, feelings, mind, and spirit coming for the first time into absolute coherent focus. Maybe you lifted your voice in song or raised a charge brush to make a mark on paper and felt time standing still, felt both completely awake and completely dissolved in the experience. As people tell these tales, when the lights came up, when the song ended, when the drawing was finished, something new had begun to emerge. Even if they didn't understand what it was, they knew they wanted to return to it as soon and as often as possible. Well, these stories are all different. They're all the same. We are also qualified to work on our society's broken operating systems because we know how to make a portal for others' transformation, inviting others into a state most aptly described by Abraham Joshua Heschel as radical amazement. Heschel wrote, "The greatest hindrance to knowledge is our adjustment to conventional notions, to mental cliches. Wonder, or radical amazement, the state of maladjustment to words and notions, is therefore a prerequisite for an authentic awareness of that which is." Radical amazement means opening our minds to the reality that we're living on a giant rock hurtling through space, and that while we're able to learn a great deal about how that works, no one can say with certainty why we are here. When I focus on that rock in my mind's eye, I feel a little unsteady on my feet, as if I might slip off. When you think about that image, do you have that same feeling? Yeah, that's where we really live. Radical amazement can be a perpetual state of being. Heschel writes, "Being is unbelievable. We are amazed at seeing anything at all, amazed not only at particular values and feelings, but at the unexpectedness of being as such, at the fact that there is being at all." But it's a little harder to be amazed while cleaning the toilet or paying the bills. Many of us connect with amazement most powerfully in that integrated state of being that arises from an encounter with the sublime. It's the way we feel in the full flow of creativity, when overcome by love, when gazing into the heart of a rose, when standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon or Pacific Ocean, bathed in setting sunlight. It is one of the essential experiences of being human, and it is the core of identity and meaning from which many artists' passion evolves. Such experiences teach us what it is to be fully alive and awake. Indeed, these experiences of integration, of wholeness, evoke that most potent relationship, love. In Plato's philosophy, Eros is the attraction to whatever is beautiful, good, and true. Art eroticizes experience. Human beings in love desire the well-being of the beloved, want to know the beloved as deeply and fully as possible. Just so, a profound experience of art can open us to compassion and presence, an impulse shared by many of the artists who create occasions of wonder, of radical amazement, is to awaken fully in that way, themselves and others. Now, making and experiencing art aren't the only routes to this state, but they're accessible and direct pathways. One universal aspect of radical amazement is the awareness of connection to a vast universe and all the forms of life inhabiting it. Every one of us has the capacity to glimpse it. The ability to feel empathy is encoded in our brains and bodies. But being able to experience deep imaginative empathy doesn't automatically mean it will shape our choices any more than possessing the physical equipment for dancing or singing means any particular individual will actually do either. Moving from the latent capacity to the practice of compassion must be learned. When I sit in a theater, opening my mind and heart to experiences that are very different from my own, the tears, laughter, anxiety, or confusion I feel activates these capacities. Drama sets that learning in motion. The more opportunity I have to experience empathy with characters different from myself, the more skill I gain at understanding and compassion. The more I encounter ways of seeing that don't slide easily into my old operating assumptions, the more I am led to question those assumptions. The writer James Baldwin is a hero of mine. One of my favorite epigrams of his says, "The purpose of art is to lay bare the questions which have been hidden by the answers." A little while ago when I said we think we need to know the answers, but really what we need is to learn to live into the questions. That's what I was talking about. Living into the questions is changing the operating system, and living into the question is something that everybody in this room knows a great deal about. Everywhere I go, there are 3 questions I pose, 3 questions with plenty of room to inhabit and plenty of implications for our operating systems. Who are we as a people? What do we stand for? How do we want to be remembered? Speaking to you today, I would add, how do we North Americans want to be remembered as those whose feeling of overwhelm leads to indifference to evil, whose desire to be comfortable leads to indifference to harm, or those who initiated the great turning by laying bare the questions which have been hidden by the answers? holding those questions can have a profound daily effect. For instance, we all know how hard it is to quantify the value of art's work. I've spent a lot of time questioning why we even try. Right now, we're living on the bridge between two paradigms, two models of society, two operating systems. In the old system, which I call data stan, everything that counts can be counted. In the new world, the Republic of Stories, everything carries a story, and all the stories matter. In the first realm, art and culture are trivial, nice, but unnecessary. In the Republic of Stories, culture is the secret of survival, the connective tissue of the body politic, the matrix in which we cultivate identity, work out shared meanings, and fashion any hope of a livable, sustainable future. Datastan has evolved over centuries, arguably driven by the worship of our own creations that gathered force in the Industrial Revolution. But it took the 20th century to lend it an air of inevitability. We were persuaded that it made sense to replace jobs with automation wherever possible. Datastan's logic rationalized pollution as a necessary profit center and treated the vast harm done by toxics as collateral damage, a hiccup in a rising market. It justified corporations' entitlement to export jobs to low-wage labor markets and validated the anti-public sector rhetoric that has shifted public spending in the US from peaceful social goods like education, environmental protection, and health to war, imprisonment, and corporate subsidy. With far fewer human beings employed as social connective tissue, we adjusted to the logic of automating human interaction, just as the man in my joke adjusted to his new suit. To the degree that this project succeeds, it makes us just as miserable as he was. Machines can be a boon to pleasure and freedom, but I want to make use of them, not be controlled by them. If it were a pleasure to be treated like a cog in a machine, people would volunteer for it. Instead, those whose economic circumstances enable them to evade public and private bureaucracies, customer service departments, and the type of assessment that allows a number to stand for one's worth, invariably use their money to insulate themselves from this diminishment. Everyone who can avoid Datastan does. But that doesn't stop them from prescribing it for the rest of us. Many of the systems we must interface with are in the grip of what I call the metric syndrome, an artifact of Datastan's operating system. Funders and public agencies, subject to criticism and infused with their leaders' own internalized powerlessness, can be seriously risk-averse. Some believe that those who hold the purse strings require success and impact to be quantified, that numbers, and only numbers, constitute proof of value. This leads to establishing metrics, numerical benchmarks, as a way of keeping score. You pick something that can be measured or counted, and that becomes the indicator of success, and often it is just because it can be measured. In the environmental arena, things like the volume of solid waste reduction become the holy grail. In art's work, you find things like the economic multiplier effect, claiming so many dollars in economic impact for each one spent on a theater ticket or museum admission, or completely meaningless factors like artist-participant contact hours. I spoke to someone recently who works with people who are in a community that historically has a hard time living to the kind of thing that they're suffering with, which is HIV. She was having a hard time getting US medical agencies to recognize her group's success because they opt for easy to measure metrics like compliance, which is, are you taking your medications? The work she's doing, sharing powerful first-person stories by people living with HIV, has an altogether different and less quantifiable impact. Sharing stories promotes disclosure to community and family members, rippling out into the larger community. Then more people take preventive measures, get tested, and offer acceptance and compassion to those who are already suffering. It's not a stretch to say this will have at least as much impact on the epidemic as compliance with doctors' orders by those who already have the virus. But you can't reduce it to a number. Questioning data stands orthodoxies is something that art does very well. For one thing, art intrinsically calls the metric syndrome into question. It's impossible to portray the impact of artwork using only numbers. I sometimes compare the attempt with trying to explain a rainbow without using colors. For another, it's becoming completely obvious that treating people like widgets cannot help to make us more skillful or nimble in facing today's enormous personal and planetary challenges. What needs doing now is much more like a giant collaborative work of art than like a factory or a corporation, data stands, preferred models of social organization. Responding to what is being asked of us now requires creativity, improvisation, resourcefulness, connectivity, social imagination, empathy, all skills and habits of mind characteristic of artists, all capacities we acquire through the experience of making and taking part in works of art. What can art do in the face of overwhelming questions of sustainability we now face? It can catalyze the awareness, perception, radical amazement, and questioning that can rewrite our operating system. We tend to see social change in terms of organizing, and that's one essential truth. But what might be understood as a social movement can simultaneously be seen as a spiritual awakening. The present moment, a passageway between paradigms, offers us the opportunity to be part of a shift in human history in which the things that have been shunted off to the margins, beauty, meaning, reflection, creativity, facing loss, finding resilience, the wonder and reverence that underpin the golden rule, in which these important things will at last be given their true value. Necessity and creativity can collaborate. So what can we do to actualize this awakening, to rewrite the operating system, to catalyze the revolution in consciousness that will turn things around? We can rewrite our own stories so that we understand our work in the largest possible context as part of a planetary shift. As I never tire of saying, the way we shape our stories shapes our lives. You may carry a story that says, I'm just one little actor or writer or environmental activist against a huge machine. The experts tell me what the metrics are, and I'm not really moving the needle. If this is your story, how would things change if you chose a different one? What if you said, my specific artistic or political practice matters? It uses my gifts, gives me and others pleasure and agency, creates moments of meaning. But what matters most is that I am connected to a global field of consciousness workers committed to cultivating the awareness and empathy that will transform our collective operating system to one that turns on the golden rule. We can recognize our own need for nourishment, the essential role of pleasure in our capacity to thrive. As I travel around giving talks, especially on campuses, I'm often asked for a certain type of advice. What should I do? What's the most important thing? Students ask me this. I always give them the same response. Do what gives you pleasure and uses you fully, because that is what will be, and you know the word that's coming next, sustainable for you. We can speak up, letting the hot air out of data stands assumptions, making it clear that if the suit doesn't fit, we won't be contorting our bodies to its contours. This requires collaboration. The lone grant seeker who calls out the stupidity of the metric syndrome is vulnerable to being picked off. The coalition that speaks with one voice has much more of a chance of being heard. In a fortified system, it takes audacity even to raise our voices in unison. But understanding the importance of our mission generates audacity. In a dark time, many of us have been afraid to get our hopes up. We've internalized data stands' claims of timeless permanence, and risking disappointment seems too painful to bear. Yet everything created must first be imagined. And it takes time for imagination to become actuality. There is one thing we know for absolutely certain. Those who are afraid to get their hopes up will never see their hopes realized. Now, I want to pose a few questions to you, and I'm not sure if I have time to do all I hoped with that. Can you tell me what time it is? 10:02. And are we ending exactly at 10, even though we left on, started early? If we are, it's okay, just tell me. Okay, all right, so let's do these together. One of the challenges of doing arts work with social change in these times is the way that data stand's way of living crowds out time for necessary reflection. We're working long hours at our art, we're writing grant proposals, we're sweeping the floor, we're trying to be maximally productive in every moment that's available. Conferences are good because they take us out of ordinary time and they create a little space to do something different, to live into something different. So first thing I want to tell you is you will never catch up on your email anyway, so don't use this time at the conference to catch up on your email. You'll get much more out of it if you catch up on reflection and you have the opportunity to engage in critical dialogue with your peers and allies. Try to see your work in a new light. Try to sharpen your thinking. Try to sharpen your practice. So because we're at the beginning of the conference, I want to start out, as I mean to go on, and take a few minutes to get in touch with some questions. You're not going to get to an answer, and we already know living into the questions is more important than the answers anyway. But I'm going to pose each one to you and then just give you a moment to jot down the first thoughts that come into your mind. And then we'll open the floor for discussion, okay? But maybe a breath would be good first. What do you think? You want to try one? Yeah. Thank God for breath, huh? The first one is about your story. What story shapes your self-understanding and your work? Are there places in your current story, in the one you're carrying right now, that fit like the man's suit in my joke, limiting or distorting your mobility and freedom? When you think, what is a bigger story? Do any images, words, ideas, snatches of music, whatever come to you? Take a moment. What's your story now? Does it need to be enlarged? Kind of amazing how long a minute is, isn't it, if you're actually watching it count down? Okay, you'll have the whole conference to add to that one. Ian talked about questioning arising from what we hear and what we experience here. So that's my second question to you. What questions are you carrying into the conference? The practical questions are really important, and I see all these sessions around tech stuff and touring and other audience, other practical dimensions of the work that people are doing, which is really great. But I'm asking you to check in with questions that have to do with your personal operating system. Is there a question in your mind waving its little hand like an eager pupil in class? Is there a question nagging at you from the corner of your brain or your heart somewhere? Is there an old assumption that wants to be questioned? Is there a new question that wants to open a dialogue with you? You don't know where it's coming from. Take a minute, make some notes on that. And then out of those two, out of whatever arose for you, what then is your work here for these 3 days, 3 days? If you're on a mission, if you have a task, if you see something you want to accomplish in the compass of the conference, what is that? What is your work? Take a minute to do that, and then if you want to share any of those, or if you have questions, or if you want to pick a fight with me, I kind of like to fight too, so whatever you want. Take a minute. Okay, we have like 6 or 7 minutes, which will be really, really long compared to the minutes we just had, right? So questions, comments, sharing something that came up for you, whatever you like. Show me your hands. Yes, Harry. Hi.
Can you hear me all right at the front there?
I can.
So when I was studying, I always studied across arts and sciences both, and now I spend about half my week doing management and numbers, and about half my week working on my artistic practice. So I find myself a little resistant to the sort of binary of numbers on one hand and stories on the other. And increasingly I find in my own artistic practice that I'm using measurement and the quantified self and data visualization as a place to perform critique, to be observed, to make satire out of numbers. And I find a well-placed number, an attractive pie chart sometimes is a powerful tool as a good story, and sometimes a bad story and an old story as oppressive as really unpleasantly used numbers. So I found myself a bit resistant to that binary thinking, and I was wondering what radical possibilities you might find in numbers, if you could find something exciting and wonderful and amazing in data.
No, let me, I mean, if you decide you want to read either one of my books, then what you'll read there is that, of course, we live in both worlds. You know, stop means stop and go means go. And if we ignore that binary system, then we give up living at all. When I'm often quoting statistics in my talks. In the United States, we're spending more than 3 annual National Endowment for the Arts budgets a day, 7 days a week on war. That's an impressive number, and it carries a lot of impact. So we all have to be fluent in both vocabularies. We all live simultaneously in both worlds. The problem is, and of course, everything has its story. A racist story is a story just as much as a story of liberation and connection. So I'm sorry that in the economy of having only a small amount of time to talk, I gave the impression that I think we have a choice between one or the other. My problem is, right now, we're moving from a point in which data stand is dominant, so what's been set up is a world in which the only value is what can be quantified, to one in which numbers are incredibly useful, but in the context of all the other ways that we take in information from our bodies, feelings, minds, and spirits in the world. And that integration is what I see happening with the paradigm shift that we're actualizing right now, that we're in the middle of right now. But of course, I would be very stupid if I said that numbers were bad and stories were good. Yeah. Who else? Yes.
Arlene, I've spent this whole hour hoping that you're going to be publishing this talk on your website so that I can go back and revisit some of these concepts.
If it's not on my website, it'll be somewhere else, and I'll let you guys all know where it will be. I'd be glad to. Thank you. Want to share anything that came up for you when you looked at the questions? Or or ask. Go ahead.
Just a thought about this drive to make change and actualize change versus helping to create the imaginative space for others too. And just wondering about art that can engage people in practice. Do you have any thoughts on that too? If you get what I mean? Yeah.
I do. You know, my own earlier work and where I'm rooted is in community cultural development, which is, now there's a lot of different words for it, right? Social practice, participatory art, community engaged art, and so forth. It's almost all engaging people actively and collaborating toward the creation of something in which the process and the product are equally important, because they're equally enlarging and they have equal impact not only on the participants but something that ripples outward. The older I get, the more I think that's great too, and then all other forms of art as well, because that trigger, that expansion of consciousness can happen in many, many different settings, in many different ways. I've been working with El Sistema people, some in the United States. People use classical music to create social citizenship, and I never would have done that, you know, back in the day. And that, I mean, Abreu, the guy who started that thing, says we're making citizens, not musicians. So I think there's many, many different paths, and all we have to do 1,000 million trillion flowers right now. We have to do everything. So that's why there's room for you to do exactly what aligns you with your pleasure and purpose most fully. And let's see, I think we're maybe done, huh? Are we? One more? Okay, then we are done. Thank you so much.
So we're going to move things along to breakouts. I want to thank Arlene again. If we can give her another round of applause, I'd appreciate it. She's around for the entire conference, so if the other questions come up later. She's also going to be moderating a panel and around and leading a workshop tomorrow in the afternoon. I'm going to bring up Boomer Stacy from PACT to talk a little bit about housekeeping and where you're going next.
Thanks, Ian. So just a few housekeeping things. This is where the coffee lives. So even though you're going to be moving to other places, if you want to grab a coffee before you go or water, it's at the back. I want to thank the City of Toronto and the Toronto Atmospheric Fund for sponsoring the coffee breaks. I have a few reminders for people. You can sign up for the Wednesday pro bono sessions at the registration desk. There's information on the guests that you can meet with. It's on a first come, first served basis, so please make sure you sign up there. Washrooms you've probably already seen are right here. The next 3 breakout sessions, there's one here, which is the How Do Arts Organizations Integrate and Balance Sustainability as a Core Value. In the Great Hall, we have What Are Approaches to Sustainability in the Arts, Makers, Presenters, Contexts. And in the Theater Center pop-up, we have How Does an Artist Talk About Environmental Issues Through Performance? If you don't know where those sessions are, we have walkers, volunteers who, they're at the back. You can meet them by the registration desk. They'll take you to either of those 2 locations and make sure you get there safely. 2 more quick reminders. There's a reception here tonight in this space with the National Theatre School. Please come for that. Immediately following the reception, there's a free reading at the Great Hall with Alana Mitchell, which starts at 8 o'clock. And, one more, sorry. The trade show starts at 11:30, which is just outside the building. Follow it along and follow the signs for the glass factory. Don't go through the building. I've been told it's through the men's change room for the gym. So don't accidentally go through that way, okay? Awe? Was that an awe? And I think that's it. So we have about 10 minutes before the next session starts. So one more? Yeah.
And then we have a lunchtime plenary with Barry Lord here. We'll get started right after 12. So as the trade show opens up, also know that lunch will be available in here, and to get yourself settled. And once we're settled, we'll have Barry as well.
Okay, thank you.